It's exciting. We're back. I have a little more time. You have a little more time. Back on the horn with Captain Blackburn.
R.
Let's hit the intro.
This is not a show and might not even be a connection. Here's Judah and guest.
We have a good connection, but it's been a while, and it's hard for the re-entry. We were thinking of things to talk about. Josh, how you been, by the way? You been all right?
Doing well.
Oh, yeah, you look good. You look
summertime and the living is easy.
Yeah. Well, you look well. One of the things that came up is the idea of the language of culture, and I guess it just came up because I was talking to somebody from Bristol, the Virginia side, not the Tennessee side, but that's your neck of the woods there, and I just found it interesting. You know, I always try to be a chameleon. I try to be all things to all people, but also, as a counselor, I know that it puts people at ease to sort of, there's plenty of books, that talk about parroting people, or at least, matching their energy, and how that helps further things along, makes things feel more at ease. I think we've talked before about both of us. Well, at least I know I have a problem with it because sometimes it gets out of hand. They make fun of these. They make fun of these politicians like Hillary Clinton, and sometimes they'll get a Southern accent as soon as they get down south. They'll be like y'all and all that. And the same thing happens to me. As soon as I find myself, as soon as I start talking to somebody like that, it comes out of me. I just I don't know. What is your take on that? Does that happen to you?
All the time.
Really?
Time. Yeah, because
Does that mean we're more empathetic?
Well, I think there's some. I don't know. I really think there's a bit of a biological pressure to do that, or an inclination to literally to fit in, or to. But like for me, it's like within a range. Yeah, because I've got clients that aren't, they didn't grow up here, or they're not, from the South. And then being a Navy brat where I've lived up and down the East Coast, yeah, I do kind of have this nondescript, depending upon the time of the day and who I've been with, I generally have this sort of nondescript accent. And even a broader cultural experience.
Yeah.
But no, yeah, depending upon who I'm working with, the twang can ebb and flow, and even the language that I use, metaphors that I use will shift. And yeah, it is mirroring. It is,
mirroring. That, yeah, parroting is the more maladaptive idea of mirroring. Mirroring is
I mean, we're I'm mirroring the person, and at the same time keeping an eye on, at times, just being myself, whatever that is.
Well, that's something that we've talked about a little bit, that both of us, I wasn't a military brat, but my dad did move around a lot. Yeah, I tell people he hitchhiked before he got married, and he just kept hitchhiking with the family afterward. No, but we did move around a lot, and I know you moved around a lot, and I guess that's one thing that I struggle with, is when it comes down to being myself, especially in terms of a cultural language. It's like, well, I don't really have one that I'm married to.
Well, and I think it's an area that, using terms like intersectionality is appropriate. Because I grew up. I mean, speaking firsthand, I grew up in a military household, which is its own culture. And then my mother is from New Jersey, and my father's from the Panhandle of Texas, and those are two distinct and different cultures. One's very Midwestern. My mother is a little more cosmopolitan in a way, despite the fact that, like, my mother's maiden name is Fields, and my grandfather's name was Stackhouse. So they're pretty broad, Anglo-Saxon English, last names. And then I grew up in the South, but see, my mother, it's funny, like when she gets animated and kind of excited, you'd think she's a little Jewish woman sometimes.
What? Really?
Yes. Yeah. Compared to, more straight laced, Scots Irish or Anglo-Saxon esque like folks where emotions are a little bit more inhibited. My mother's a little more open with her emotions. And even like if she's been talking with her brothers, or this used to, I think, happen more when my grandmother was alive. This sort of New Jersey accent would come out, and it still comes out in a way. It's sort of sharp and nasal, and you almost think it's like it's time for coffee talk. Coffee talk with Linda.
That's fascinating. Wow.
So it's this hodgepodge of cultural backgrounds, but then I've predominantly grown up in the South, and then as an adult I've stayed in the South. And then throw on top of that, I think my own experience as an Orthodox Christian has put me in a whole other milieu that's international, where you're rubbing shoulders with Greeks and Russians and Ukrainians and Serbians, and it just has a slightly more international flavor.
Well, that's interesting you say that. Yeah, because last week I went. Was it last week or the week before? I can't remember. But I went to a church camp with my girls, and it was a Anglican church camp. And obviously, the Anglican milieu is much less diverse than
it's very white.
Very white, yeah.
In the United States.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing is that, so we just transferred diocese from one in Africa to one here.
Yep.
And many of the churches actually did have some children and counselors and stuff from I think it was, I can't remember, Uganda or something like that. So it was predominantly white and pasty, but there was also a good, I guess I didn't think about it till now, but they weren't African American, but they were it's hard to talk about, isn't it? I feel like it's a landmine, but they were definitely of different culture. They're African, and I guess it's because of the Anglican presence there in Africa. Many of the churches have a big African presence.
That's the flip side. Yeah, I mean, in the Anglican world, the Anglosphere, there's a huge number of Anglican Christians in Africa and other places in the global South.
But many of the leaders were. Now, I'll say this is very diverse in terms of gender. There was, of course, for something like camp. I don't know if that is, well, maybe because it's during the work hours or whatever. But it was very high. It was predominantly, well, it's about half and half. Maybe 60-40 women. But all the men, like, I don't know, beards.
Beards are popular.
Actually, they're not as popular in the Anglican church as I thought.
Oh, well,
it'd be.
Oh, well.
That's different than the Eastern Orthodox, right?
I mean, there's a lot of beardy folks in the Orthodox world. Yeah, we've got some monks and stuff that they look like the Orthodox version of Gandalf, or Dumbledore. We've got our fair share. So, or backup members to ZZ Top, they've got big gray beards that come down to
because
the belly
there's something. Well, we had a couple of those guys, but that's interesting.
So I mean, it's
church cultures though. I mean, we could even talk about the language of the different
language.
denominational cultures.
Because
Oh,
yeah, I
and
mean,
speaking of Anglicans, our my fellow Anglican Scott Pinot
Hello,
is
Scott
here watching, and he says, "Wow, it's 9:00 on a Wednesday already. Thank you for altering the time." Yeah, this will probably be more like what we're gonna do for the summer, at least.
yeah.
Mondays in the afternoon, in the evening. But cultural language
Well, I mean, I think about it, we have these slightly different ways of living, and that builds different experiences and metaphors, and so much of our working ways of communicating, of using language are metaphorical. You know, they're put together with multiple concepts, and um, even something as simple as like I like to use metaphors a lot in psychotherapy, doing counseling. And I'll make reference to driving a stick shift, because sometimes when we talk about, arousal and emotional activation, the metaphor I like to use is like, you can be excited, like you can be ramped up, you can be aroused, you can be activated, and choose to do a specific behavior. You don't necessarily have to react. You can respond. So the metaphor with, like, using a stick shift, the RPMs can be going through the roof on your engine, but if you're in neutral, you pop the clutch and put it in neutral, you're not driving anywhere. Right? Like, you're still in control of where the car goes, but it doesn't mean you have to be in drive. You can kick it. Like, that's a move you can do. You can take a couple breaths. You can take a more compassionate, mindful, curious view on what's going on inside of your body, as opposed to immediately reacting to it. And clients a lot of times are like, I have no idea what you're talking about, because I've never driven a stick shift. And they've never, I mean, like, because how many people with an automatic car have ever put the car in neutral? Almost
not many.
Anybody. I mean, like, very few. Because there's not really,
accidentally, maybe,
right? Like, there's not a good reason
to rev it while it's in neutral.
Or
even to put it in neutral. You're right.
Or even just to put it in neutral. So, metaphors.
That's
really
interesting.
Move things along culturally.
You are somebody that talks a lot, and I think I've learned a little bit, but I want to learn more and talk about more, is the difference, or the importance, we'll say, of action. And I was trying to remember what you said the other day about action, how there is behavior, how there is no belief beyond behavior, or something like that. I was trying to remember something you say often.
Well, behavior is the only thing we have absolute control over.
Right. But this was something else. This was like in relation to, there's only one, in relation to like their belief, like that real belief is behavior. Like, there is no
spirituality. I get that all the time. Yeah, when people are like, well, I'm a spiritual person, and I'm like, well, how's your spiritual life? And they're like, well, I believe in X, Y, and Z, and I'm like, well, what do you do?
Yes, that's what it is.
And people look at me like I fell off a turnip wagon, and part of that, I think, is my own personal struggle, because I'm without moving the camera, and I could, like, I'm surrounded by a lot of books, and so it's easy to hold a belief, but it's not easy to do it, to put it into action. And I was talking with a buddy of mine recently. All of us are very familiar with the what. Like, I need to be gentle. I need to be holy. I need to be patient. I need to show kindness. So, and oftentimes, like, in conversations internally and in between people, there's a lot of heavy-handed use of shoulds. You should be good. You should do this. You should do that. You shouldn't do this. You shouldn't do that. Well, that's easy.
Yeah.
What's not easy is how.
I think that's. I don't want to get.
How do we do that? But yeah, we could talk about that some other time. The difference between what and how.
I think I want to weave it in somehow because this is something that struck me. So on Sunday, the priest had a really good we call him pastor, but he had a really good discussion about the power of the name of Jesus and using the name of Jesus in action versus. But then he had a point in which he said, like, he talked about response, and that's something that I've learned quite a bit in my last church is the importance of the difference between application and response. And it made me start thinking about, like, what is the difference between application and response? And I think there is just a powerful difference there between application, which is up here, kind of like what you're saying is like, well, I believe, I should, I shouldn't. And response is, well, I gotta move, I gotta act different. This propels me. This belief propels me differently.
It does. But I think a lot of times we never move past the difference between believing and doing, and caught in the lie that holding a belief alone is actual knowledge. That's not knowledge. That's not wisdom. It's only when it's applied. It's only when you do it, when you live it, you struggle with it, does it start to become knowledge. Like, do you really know it? Have you experienced? And maybe we could even break away. English is sort of a funky language talking about this, but experience. Like, it's one thing to know about God. It's another thing to experience God. It's one thing to know about prayer. It's another thing to pray. It's one thing to know about gentleness. It's another thing to practice it.
Interesting.
Or like how like I had a fun conversation with the priests that are assigned to our church, is Father Stephen, and his father's retired and is also sort of like a step-in priest at times, and we're just discussing about how to complain about your priest. Because at least within Orthodox, we really put a hard accent on non-judgment, and it not being our role as individuals to judge our neighbor.
That criticizing aspect of life.
Yeah, that criticizing, critical aspect of life. And the hard thing there is, even being evaluative can get us there. But then you get into like having to learn how to be discerning. And my big struggle was like, the only thing that people need to do is, like, if you want to complain about your priest, just go pray about it. That's it. And it's not to say, and again, like that's a practice of non-judgment. And it's also a practice of prayer. I said, but my follow-up to that is there's nothing, I think, wrong or even immoral, unethical, or harmful with sharing feedback or impact with a priest. Or with anybody for that matter. So, right? I mean, it's easy for me to be critical with my children, or my wife, or my friends, or whoever. Well, you should have done it this way.
Should, going back to the should.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of a crass way. I mean, normally we do it a little more subtly, but it's a whole other feel when I can say, hey, when you sent that email, and I read this, it really hit me hard, and I had a hard time not seeing.
Or it hurt me.
Yeah. And being able to and that's just sharing impact. And that's just sharing feedback. I'm not at that point. It's still sort of open. I'm not saying that it's right or wrong necessarily. I mean, it could be.
It's being descriptive.
It's being very descriptive, right? And I'm not also really coercing or compelling any kind of action. At that point, all I'm doing is giving a person information that they probably would not have had access to unless I revealed it. Unless it's something that's like, you say something to me and my face lights up in a not so pleasant way. But even then, like
the aspect of revelation versus judgment.
Yes.
You reveal things rather than judge people, right? Like you
uncover. And it's finding that balance of like, the gospel has these radical demands where Jesus is like, don't go around judging your neighbor. Like our whole life struggle is about getting
Sure.
this mote out of our eye. Not trying to help our neighbor necessarily with it. And my other thing is, it's like the only person that can really help my brother is the Lord. Like, if I really believe that he's active and present and powerful, then maybe he has ways of opening up my brother's heart or my sister's heart that I don't. And it's not to say that, again, like, there is a place for rebuke. There is some Matthew 18 kind of situations in life. And being very careful about, well, when is that appropriate? How is that appropriate? Because a lot of times in parish life, I think we've all experienced this, is it's very easy, if we're not careful, to get petty.
Yeah.
And to not move in a spirit of charity, but to really move in a spirit of condemnation. And I think it's more effective that way. Like, the way I'm proposing probably might actually get what I want. Like, hey, if you like, this particular instance was that I mentioned to Father Stephen. I was like, we were talking about some Sunday school things and future things, and I said, remember a couple months back when you sent out an email, like the date, like with less than 24 hours notice, that you wanted to get people together and have a listening session? I was like, yeah, that didn't feel really good. Because it felt like it was hard for me not to get the sense that you really didn't want our other opinions at this meeting, which was, and I know him, and so he kind of we kind of know each other by now, where he's like, he's just giving feedback.
Yeah.
He's just trying to help me be better. That's it. Like, I'm not, because I'm a sinner, and I can't take care of myself, much less try to take care of other people sometimes. Yeah.
Well, I think that's important, thinking about relationship as feedback, because that's what's so detrimental to criticism and complaint. Right? When we complain, it's a very individualistic thing. It's a me thing, right? It's I want to be in control of this. I want to control this to be different.
I want to change your behavior.
Yeah.
I want you to do something different. Yeah. I want you to do something different for me, as opposed to something that's much more complicated and complex, which is, I'm going to reveal myself to you.
Yeah.
And now it's your turn to do something.
Yeah. And it's much more relational, in the sense that it's looking at the dynamic between two people instead of just me. Like, this doesn't work for me, is different than when you do that. It's not, it's doing something to me. I wonder,
it's
am
broader.
I in the right? The observational thing.
And honestly, like, to weave this back into language and culture, this is an aspect of culture building. Because most cultures don't communicate in this way, and certainly not in the Western world, right? Like,
say more. What do you mean?
Well, I mean, so you're a classical educator. I hope at some point in the future I might become a classical educator. I'm still kicking that around in my mind. But think about it. Like, the way that we often teach logic and rhetoric isn't really about creating a connection. It's really not often about how to understand the other person well. It's about how to evaluate an argument and how to win an argument, how to persuade. And there's a place for that. There's a place for persuasion. I'm not saying that there's not, but I almost start to wonder if we lean just a little bit too hard on that, as that being the only function of communication in logic and grammar.
Well, maybe going back to the idea, maybe this is how we can weave it into the idea of talking about culture. But the difference between persuading someone with mirroring them and persuading them with an intellectual an intellectual argument or um, something. Oh, you need to know this. You should do this. It's sort of so that intellectual control versus a connection. Like there's so much more power, but good power, right? Like there's so much more relational capital in something that you're trying to connect with somebody rather than trying to control them, make them think differently.
Well, yeah, or I mean, because if good persuasion often ends with some kind of call to action, and that's a hard thing. Like sometimes I think there's certainly an appropriate place for that, but if that's all we ever do, and we never leave any room for doubt on our end, and we make very little allowance for creating a connection versus something that's a little bit more adversarial, hostile. On a bad day, it can be coercive.
One-way avenue type thing. Like, right?
Yes. And it's important to evaluate propositions, and it's important to evaluate arguments, and it's important to communicate well. But it begs the questions of to what end and for what purpose, and how do we prioritize those things? Is it really always about winning the argument or being right?
I think that's crucial, because I think there's sometimes that people will say, "Oh, it's just because you're from this, you come from this set of beliefs," or "Oh, it's just because you come from this culture. Oh, it's just because you come from this denomination or a political stance or political party."
Yeah.
And I think it's okay to say it may be, it's okay to have a structure you come from. However, what it isn't okay, I think, and what what people are saying is you're just trying to be right? Like
it can very easily get to that place, right? As opposed to using these liberal arts tools, using logic, using grammar, using rhetoric, to create a connection, to develop understanding, to appreciate the complexities of another human being. Because it just like somebody might have a counter argument that, well, if you weren't a white guy born in the South in 1980, or I wasn't born in the South, but I grew up there, you might not think the way you do, and you may not act the way you do, and there's some truth to that. However, I also myself have a lived experience, but I am kind of curious about this other person's lived experience, and
curiosity, and I think that's a common theme of Not a Show, particularly between me and you. Particularly between me and you, and Scott and I have talked about it, and Mike and I have it comes up, this idea of curiosity. I think it's extremely important. I think lately I need to remember in situations that I'm curious, and to remind people, like, hey, I may be of this or that, a camp or culture or color. However, I am curious, and I want you to know that I'm curious. And if I'm not coming across as curious, then there's a problem. That's something I would like to change.
Sure. Well, and for me, curiosity is a very critical part of pursuing humility, because I'm leaving the door open that there are things that I don't know, and I'm leaving the door open that I have this bias, and my own perspective that can muddy my understanding of what's really going on in front of me. And the other part of humility is, there are some things that for me are non-negotiable. Like,
really, is there a lot that's non-negotiable for you?
Well, sure. I mean, I think everyone has those non-negotiables. It's just simply a matter of understanding what they are. Like for me, like the propositional truths that are contained, for instance, say in maybe the Nicene Creed, like those are not, like, I can talk about them, but I'm not negotiating those for me. Like those
Mm.
are, presuppositions from which I work from. I mean, I suppose, one could re-examine those. My struggle is I've already done that. Like I've already looked at that. Um, there and recognizing there are lots of other areas of life and thought and
Mm.
belief and practice that are subject to negotiation and subject to review and subject to holding a little bit more lightly than some other things.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, on the spectrum of negotiation, I see that's the thing is I don't think there's anything that's non-negotiable for me. I just think there on the spectrum of negotiation, there are things that are it's not going to be negotiated, right? Like
sure.
I
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
to the other side of the spectrum is let's talk about right now. I don't know,
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have no problem going. I'm interested in hearing your perspective. I really want to understand. And along with that, I am open to change. I am
Yeah.
open to altering my current beliefs about whatever. And there's something, at least for my own self, I know that it's not even what I mean, we can talk about alternate views on things like who is God, what is the church,
Yeah.
who is Jesus, who is the Holy Spirit. Like, yeah, we can talk about that. And I am a little dogmatic about some of those areas because, you know,
Well, and that
it's.
goes back to what we've talked about as personality. There are some things that make up the core of who I am.
Mhm.
You shake those, you shake who I am, and I think we all have those things. Like that's the cores of our beliefs are important because you take those away from us, they're nobody,
They're
right? We're just
intrinsically, yeah, a part of our identity.
yeah.
Um,
It
yeah,
builds the foundation of who we are. So not that they can't change, just that I mean, I think everything can change and might change a little bit,
and,
but
and
there's
especially
certain things
the
that,
language that we use. We'll
yeah,
weave it back to culture. Like, the language that we use around something. I mean, it's an area that's subject to clarification. It's subject to being altered. It's subject to being refined.
yeah,
Does it accurately describe what is?
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
does it work? Is it functional?
Hmm.
Um,
Amen. Well, we said we'd keep it short. We'll probably try to keep it short. It'll be in the afternoons.
yeah,
This summer, it'll be on Mondays. Scott reminds us that afternoons are better for a lot of people. Maybe not for
yeah,
others, but
we'll see.
yeah, we'll see. And man, I'm just so glad to be able to talk to you again, Josh. It's kind of weird in some ways that like I don't talk to you unless I talk to you online.
Well,
I mean,
that's
we
okay.
text every now and then,
But,
but
but this is a lot more fun. We actually get to
yeah,
see each other's face. And
yeah. But yeah, so that has been fun, and but both of us have things we got to go to. I got family coming in town. 4th of July coming up.
all right,
We're gonna have the biggest McNeil get together I think we've had in years. There's gonna be lots of us McNeils and McNeil related.
yeah.
Somebody McNeil in the
Well,
family.
how many is lots?
I think we'll have like about 50 to 60 people.
Wow, that's exciting.
Yeah, all McNeil or married into McNeil. Yeah. So, or progeny of the McNeils. I don't know. Or maybe, whatever. So yeah, so it's gonna be fun. It's interesting. Many of them are not McNeil because I'm my kids anyway. So, but anyway, we're gonna have a huge get together, and it's
Big.
gonna be great. And we already have many of us already out here, and looking forward to. How you do anything interesting for the 4th of July? Do
Nah,
anything?
just hanging out with some friends, and then
That's interesting. That's good.
4th of July's on the Lord's Day, so
That's right. Yeah. So we'll be celebrating more than just the flag.
We're selling freedom in
Independence
all
Day.
its various kinds.
That's right. All right. Well, thanks for joining me again, man. And I guess we'll see each other next week on Monday.
See you next week, if the Lord's willing and the creek don't